Next spring, imagine stepping out onto your porch with a warm cup of tea, the kind that steams gently against the cool morning air. You take a slow walk toward your garden, expecting the usual chores, but something feels different. The soil looks darker than you remember, almost velvety, and when you reach down to touch it, it yields beneath your fingers like warm cake. No weeds, no hard patches. None of the stubborn resistance you used to fight every April. It feels as though the garden has been tending itself while you rested. And in a way, it has. You didn't spend winter hauling bags of fertilizer or dragging a tiller across the yard. Instead, you relied on a quieter method, one that works with age, not against it. I want to begin our visit today by sharing a memory with you years ago, when my knees were stronger and winter didn't settle so heavily into my bones. I believed the louder I worked, the better my garden would be. But the years taught me something gentler. Soil isn't improved through force. It's softened through patience. And autumn, not spring, is when the true transformation begins. Today we'll walk through a fall trick that fertilizer companies would prefer you never learn because it frees you from needing their products and restores the joyful ease gardening should bring, especially in our later seasons of life. Dear friend, before we wander any further into this gentle fall method, I want to sit with you for a moment and reflect on something many of us have carried for decades. Most of us grew up believing that a garden only rewards the strongest, back the longest hours, and the deepest shovel. Maybe you, like me, were taught by a parent or grandparent who rose at dawn, gripping a hoe with knuckles worn smooth from years in the sun. We watched them turn soil until it broke apart in dusty clouds, convinced that if we didn't work that hard, nothing good would grow. For years, I followed their footsteps because I thought it was the only way. But age has such a gentle, honest way of showing us what truly matters. When bending becomes slower and tools feel heavier, we start asking questions younger hands never bothered with. And one of the biggest lessons I learned was that nature never intended for gardening to be a battle. It's our human habits, our instinct to control and tidy and force outcomes that make it feel that way. Let me tell you a story. A neighbor of mine, Margaret, gardened well into her 70s. She used to joke that her roses had known her longer than most of the people in town. One September afternoon, I found her sitting on an overturned bucket, barely doing anything at all. I asked if she was taking a break. She smiled and said, "No, dear. I'm letting the garden remember how to take care of itself." At the time, I didn't understand. But over the years, as my own energy dipped and old methods stopped making sense, her words came back to me. And that's when I began paying attention to places humans never touch: old forests, wild meadows, the edges of abandoned farms, places where nobody tills, nobody sprinkles fertilizer from a shiny bag. And yet, growth happens effortlessly. You know, we admire those landscapes without realizing they're teaching us something profound. The earth is already equipped to renew itself if we stop interrupting it. The soil in these places becomes soft, alive, and nutritious. Not because someone worked harder, but because time, seasons, fallen leaves, and quiet cycles do the work for us. Meanwhile, many gardeners, especially those following the old books, are still wrestling with tillers each fall and spring, thinking loosened soil must come from muscle. But the truth is simpler, kinder. Nature prefers a slow hand and a patient heart. When we shift from force to understanding, from digging to observing, we suddenly find ourselves doing less work and getting better results. So if you've ever felt frustrated that gardening seems to demand more strength than your body wants to give, know this: the problem isn't you, it's the method. And today, we're going to gently set that old belief down and pick up a way that's softer, smarter, and far more suited to the beautiful season of life we're in now. Dear friend, let's take a walk together, not into a garden groomed by human hands, but into the quiet understory of an old forest. Picture the ground beneath your feet, soft, springy, cushioned by years of fallen leaves. You don't see anyone out there with a rake or a tiller, Yet that soil stays rich, dark, and perfectly structured. When I first began paying attention to forests, I realized they were offering lessons I had overlooked for most of my gardening life. Nature has already perfected the art of soil building. It does so gently, steadily, and without any of the strain we often put on ourselves. And the greatest teacher of all is the forest floor, where everything that once lived becomes nourishment for what will grow next. Years ago, I visited a woodland preserve with a friend who was a retired botanist. As we walked, she knelt down and scooped a handful of forest soil, holding it out like something precious. It fell through her fingers like warm coffee grounds. This, she told me, is what every gardener is trying to create, but we keep fighting the wrong battles. She explained that when leaves fall, they form a natural blanket that protects the soil from wind, rain, and sun. Beneath that blanket, entire communities of creatures, microbes, fungi, worms wake up and begin processing that organic matter. No shovels, no fertilizers, no backbreaking chores. Just life doing what it knows how to do. And the secret to why it works is simple: forests never leave their soil uncovered. They don't scrape away last year's growth. They don't disturb the delicate tunnels and pathways created by the underground community. Everything is allowed to rest in place, break down slowly, and return to the earth. That slow decay is what creates the soft, rich soil gardeners dream of. Contrast that with what many of us were taught. We rake everything away, pull every fallen leaf, expose the soil, and till it until all the helpful organisms flee. We think we're tidying up, but really we're breaking the very system that would happily do the heavy lifting for us. The forest, on the other hand, trusts the process. It layers, protects, and lets time do the work. When I first began imitating the forest, leaving organic matter on the soil in fall, avoiding deep digging, letting the earth settle itself, it felt almost rebellious. But the next spring, my soil transformed in ways I had never seen before. It grew darker, looser, easier to work with. And here's the beautiful part: I didn't have to force anything. I simply copied what nature has already been doing for thousands of years. So as we move forward, keep that image of the forest in your mind. A living teacher reminding us that the best soil is built not through effort, but through patience, protection, and trust. Now that we've talked about the forest's quiet wisdom, dear friend, let's kneel down together right at the edge of your own garden bed and imagine for a moment what's happening beneath the surface. Not in a poetic way, but in a very real, bustling sense. Under that thin layer of earth is an entire community, more alive and more hard-working than most of us ever realized. When I first learned what was happening underground, it changed the way I gardened forever. It made me feel less like a laborer and more like a caretaker of something wonderfully alive. Think of your soil as a small town, one humming with residents who never sleep. Microbes, tiny as dust specks, are constantly breaking down old roots and leaves into nutrients. Fungi stretch through the soil like quiet highways, carrying water and minerals from one plant to another. And earthworms, those gentle, unassuming creatures, are tunneling day and night, creating air pockets, improving drainage, and mixing organic matter into every inch of soil. I once read that a single teaspoon of healthy soil can contain more living organisms than the number of people on Earth. At first, I thought it was just a nice saying. But no, it's scientifically true. And when I finally accepted that, I realized something important. My job as a gardener was not to do the work of these tiny residents, but to make sure they stayed. Let me share a small memory. A friend of mine named Paul, a soft-spoken gentleman in his late 60s, once brought me a handful of soil from his backyard and said, "Something's wrong. I don't see worms anymore." I pressed the soil between my fingers, and it felt dense, almost lifeless. Not because his plants were unhealthy, but because the soil had been disturbed so often that the underground community had simply left. Worms can't survive in places that are constantly turned over. Microbes vanish when the soil is exposed to hot sun. Fungi break apart when their networks are sliced through by tillers or shovels. It wasn't neglect that drove them away, it was habit. What I told him is the same thing I want to tell you now. Though these tiny workers don't need anything fancy. They don't need store-bought fertilizer or complicated treatments. They need food shelter and stability. The same things every living creature depends on. When we protect the soil surface, feed it gently in the fall, and avoid digging more than necessary, we invite those helpers back. And when they return, they do more for our gardens than we ever could alone. Hard pan loosens nutrients, rise, water spreads evenly, and weeds lose the chance to take hold. Once you understand the life beneath your feet, gardening stops being a chore. It becomes a relationship, a partnership. And that dear friend is where the real magic begins. Now that we've spent some time appreciating the quiet workers beneath the soil, dear friend, I want to talk about something most gardeners do without realizing its impact. We often chase order and tidiness because it feels responsible. We clear the garden at the end of the season, rake away every leaf, loosen every bed, and make everything look clean before winter arrives. But in doing so, we unintentionally destroy the very environment our underground helpers need to thrive. It's not that we mean any harm. It's simply that many of us were taught old habits that don't align with nature's ways. When we till or deeply turn soil, we slice through the fungal networks that carry nutrients and water from plant to plant. It's like cutting the roads between towns, leaving each area isolated. Every time we expose the soil to the sun, the moisture evaporates and the microbes dry out like fish left on a dock. Worms flee when their tunnels collapse, and they don't return until the soil feels safe again. Even something as simple as raking away fallen leaves removes the protective blanket that shields the soil from harsh weather. A bare garden bed may look tidy to us, but to the life below, it's a barren and dangerous landscape. Let me share a story with you. A woman named Linda, who lives just 2 houses down from me, taught me a lesson about this the gentle way older gardeners often do. One fall, she had back surgery and couldn't perform her usual cleanup routine. Her family urged her to hire help, but she shrugged and said, "Let the leaves lie. The earth knows what to do." By spring, her garden looked better than it had in years. The soil was darker, richer, easier to dig. The worms returned in numbers she hadn't seen in a decade. She hadn't done a thing, no tilling, no raking, no additives. Nature simply filled the gap her absence created. Contrast that with a younger neighbor who tilled his garden twice a year, every year. The soil looked loose at first glance, but it crusted over quickly, hardened in summer heat, and needed constant watering. He couldn't understand why weeds took over or why his plants struggled. The secret was beneath his feet. Every time he disrupted the soil, he forced the underground workers to abandon their posts. Without them, the soil collapsed into something lifeless and stubborn. This isn't meant to scold or shame, far from it. Many of us learned gardening from people who meant well and did things the old-fashioned way, because that's all they knew. But part of aging gracefully is being willing to learn new rhythms, new gentler ways that suit our bodies and the earth better. When we shift from constant disturbance to thoughtful care, we invite life back into our soil. And once those helpers return, the entire garden begins to heal itself, asking less of us and giving far more in return. Dear friend, now that we understand how easily we can disturb the underground community, it's time to talk about the food we give them and why it matters far more than most gardeners realize. Many of us grew up believing that a bag of fertilizer was the cure-all for every garden problem. bright packaging big promises and numbers like 10, 10, 10 or 25, 15 printed proudly across the front. It felt scientific, controlled, and reliable. But as the years passed and I watched my own garden rise and fall, I noticed something troubling. Fertilizer brought quick results, but not lasting ones. It was like feeding my garden a sugary snack, an instant burst of energy, followed by a slump, and then an even bigger craving for more. Compost, however, works differently. Think of it as the home-cooked meal of the soil world. It breaks down slowly, nourishing your garden steadily through the winter, even under frost and snow. And fall, not spring, is when this gentle feeding makes the biggest difference. When you add compost in autumn, you're giving the underground community an entire season to break it down, balance it, and transform it into something plants can easily use come springtime. Winter acts like a quiet kitchen, softening anything that's too acidic, calming compost that runs hot and creating harmony long before you plant a single seed. Let me tell you about a couple I once knew, Ray and Martha, who gardened side by side for nearly 40 years. Ray swore by store-bought fertilizer, claiming it made his plants grow twice as fast. Martha, on the other hand, believed in letting the earth take its time. Each fall, she spread a thin quilt of compost over her beds, humming as she worked. The following spring, their gardens revealed a striking difference. Ray's plants shot up quickly, but weakened when summer arrived, wilting at the slightest drought and catching diseases easily. Martha's plants, though slower to start, grew sturdy stems, deep roots, and lush foliage that lasted long into the season. She often said, "A garden raised too quickly forgets how to stand on its own." I didn't fully understand her wisdom until I saw the results myself. Another important truth is this: synthetic fertilizers are water-soluble. The first strong rain flushes them away, leaving your soil hungry again. Compost isn't like that. Its nutrients are locked inside organic matter that doesn't wash out with winter storms. They stay put, waiting until the soil community decides it's time to deliver them to your plants. This slow, steady nourishment is especially valuable for gardeners who want to work less, spend less, and still enjoy a thriving yard. And here's the part I want you to hold. Close compost doesn't require strength or youth. You can spread it with a small bucket, a child's wagon, or even a simple rake, no heavy shoveling needed. It's a method designed for bodies that have earned their rest and for gardeners who prefer wisdom over effort. When you switch from fertilizer to compost, you stop feeding the plants directly and start feeding the soil. And when the soil is fed well, everything above it flourishes with a quiet, dependable strength. Dear friend, now that we've opened our hearts to the idea of feeding the soil instead of forcing it, let's talk about something practical, doing this work in a way that's gentle on your body. Because gardening should bring peace, not pain. And the older I get, the more I realize that the best methods aren't just what's best for the earth, but what's kind to our backs, knees, and shoulders too. Many people imagine spreading compost as a job, meant for strong arms and youthful energy, but that simply isn't true. In fact, the secret to successful fall composting is to work small, steady, and comfortably. The biggest mistake I see older gardeners make is trying to haul heavy bags or giant wheelbarrows of compost across the yard. That's the sort of thing we could get away with decades ago. But now, our bodies deserve more grace. So let me share something that changed everything for me, switching to a small 2-gallon bucket. It sounds almost too simple, but it transforms the entire task. You fill it lightly, carry it easily, and make several gentle trips instead of one painful one. It turns what used to feel like a chore into a peaceful walk through your yard. And you finish the job without that tight pull in your lower back that shows up later in the evening. Another trick I learned from an older gardener named Charles still makes me smile. He used a children's wagon, the kind meant for toddlers, because pulling is easier than pushing, and wheels do the heavy lifting. I watched him once as he moved compost across his yard with such ease, tugging that little wagon along as if he were taking a grandchild for a stroll. He winked at me and said, "The body gets older, but the mind gets smarter." And he was right. Gentle methods aren't signs of weakness, they're signs of wisdom. When it comes time to spread the compost, here's a method that doesn't require bending or scooping with your hands. Use a garden rake, not a shovel. You simply stand in place and pull the compost toward you, letting the rake's long handle do the reaching. Your spine stays straight, your knees stay comfortable, and you move slowly around the bed, pulling the compost into a thin, even layer. It doesn't need to be thick. 2 inches is plenty. Think of it like laying down the first soft blanket before winter arrives. What I love most about this method is that it respects both the gardener and the garden. You work quietly, gently, and in harmony with your body's pace. Birds may hop around you, autumn breezes may pass through your sleeves, and the task becomes less a burden and more a ritual, a final loving gesture to your soil before the cold sets in. And when spring arrives, you'll be grateful you chose the kinder way. Dear friend, now that we've covered how to feed your soil gently, we need to talk about the step that truly completes the process, the step most gardeners overlook, even though nature never forgets it. After composting in the fall, the soil needs a protective blanket. Without it, wine can sweep nutrients away. Winter rains can compact the earth, and the sun, when it returns, can dry everything out before spring even begins. In forests, prairies, and meadows, the ground is never left exposed. Leaves fall, grass collapses, branches decay, and all of it forms a soft layer that shelters the underground community. When we imitate this natural pattern, we give our gardens the same resilience and quiet protection they've relied on for thousands of years. I learned this lesson from a small wooded trail near my home. Every autumn, I'd walk it after the first heavy leaf fall. The path would transform overnight into something muffled and peaceful. A thick, rustling quilt of gold, red, and copper. Under that layer, the soil stayed warm, longer moisture lingered gently, and the spring growth was always lush and early. Meanwhile, nearby open fields where the soil lay uncovered would crack, harden, and stay colder far into April. The difference was undeniable. It wasn't magic, it was mulch. Mulch isn't just decorative, it's essential. And the best part? The materials are often free. Fallen leaves, small wood chips, even cardboard boxes from deliveries can all act as shields that protect the compost you worked so thoughtfully to lay down. When I first began mulching my beds properly, I couldn't believe how quickly everything changed. Weeds struggled to sprout, moisture stayed where it needed to be, and the soil grew darker and softer with each passing season. I remember a woman named Elaine, well into her 70s, who spread a simple layer of leaves across her small backyard garden each fall. She used nothing fancy, just what the wind dropped at her feet. When spring came, she'd lift a corner of that leaf layer and smile. The soil beneath was dark, warm, and alive. The leaves, she'd say, do more for me than any store-bought bag ever has. She wasn't wrong. Leaves are nature's original mulch, lightweight, plentiful, and nourishing. And here's something important. Mulch doesn't need to be heavy or deep. Just a gentle cover, like tucking your soil in for winter. A thin layer is enough to protect the underground workers and ensure that everything you added in stays right where it belongs. When we choose mulch, we aren't choosing extra work. We're choosing less work later, fewer weeds, and far healthier soil. If you've ever wondered why your garden seems to struggle while wild places thrive effortlessly, the answer is simple: nature covers its soil. And when we do the same, We finally step into harmony with the rhythms the earth has trusted for ages. Dear friend, once you understand how important mulch is to protecting your soil and feeding those tiny underground workers, the next question that usually comes up is, where do I get good mulch without spending a fortune? And the beautiful truth is, this nature gives it away for free. In fact, most people throw away the very materials that could turn their gardens into rich, thriving sanctuaries. When you start looking around with a gardener's eye, you'll see mulch everywhere in bags left out, for garbage pickup in delivery boxes, in the quiet fall of leaves drifting onto neighborhood lawns. These overlooked treasures can save you money and nurture your soil far better than most store-bought options. I remember a story from a man named Harold, a gentle soul who tended a modest garden on the corner lot 2 streets over. Harold didn't have much extra income, but his soil was some of the most beautiful I'd ever seen. Every fall, he'd take early morning walks through the neighborhood with a small cart. He didn't search for anything fancy, just bags of leaves neighbors had raked and placed by the curb. When people asked why he was collecting them, he'd smile and say, "Why buy what people give away?" Those leaves became the foundation of his rich, airy soil. And each spring when I visited him, his beds were already soft and full of early growth, while others were still struggling to thaw. It wasn't luck. It was resourcefulness. Another free source of mulch comes from tree trimming services or local power companies. Many times they have to pay to dump their wood chips. But if you call them and let them know you're willing to accept a load, they're often delighted to drop it off for free. I once watched a truck unload a pile of freshly chipped branches into a neighbor's driveway. She waved at me and laughed, saying, "Saved them a fee, saved me a chore." Those chips lasted her years and slowly broke down into rich, carbon-filled soil that held water beautifully during the hot months. And then there's cardboard, something nearly every household receives weekly through deliveries. Strip off the tape-remove labels, and you're left with a wonderful weed barrier that mimics the forest's natural layering. It breaks down slowly, inviting worms and microbes to use it as a protective cover and a gentle food source. A gardener named Sharon once told me that cardboard was her secret weapon. She laid it beneath wood chips in her raised beds and hardly pulled a weed all season. "It's my quiet trick," she told me, "and it costs nothing. The important thing is this: you don't need to spend money to protect your soil." Leaves, wood chips, cardboard, these simple materials carry the same wisdom nature has relied on forever. And when you gather what others toss away, you're not only helping your garden, you're honoring the cycle of reuse that every forest depends on. It's a wise, economical, and deeply satisfying way to garden, especially for those of us looking to conserve energy and simplify our work as the years go by. Dear friend, now that we've gathered our mulch and begun to understand how it protects and enriches the soil, we need to talk about one of the most common fears gardeners have, something that stops many people from using wood chips entirely. You've probably heard it before: wood chips steal nitrogen from the soil. It's a phrase repeated so often that many gardeners accept it as truth without ever seeing the science behind it. But like many gardening myths, it's only half true. And when we understand the full story, the fear disappears and we can mulch with confidence. The myth grows from a simple misunderstanding. When wood chips are mixed into the soil, tilled, churned, or buried, they do indeed pull nitrogen from the surrounding earth as microbes break them down. This is because nitrogen is needed to decompose high-carbon materials. But here's the part: so many people misunderstand when wood chips sit on top of the soil just as nature places fallen branches, bark, or forest litter. They do not rob nitrogen from the plants at all. They act like a gentle sponge, resting on the surface, never touching the nutrients deep within. The difference is the same as setting a dry sponge on the table versus dunking it fully into a glass of water. One simply sits. The other soaks everything up. I once had a conversation with a new gardener named Elise, who was terrified to use wood chips after reading strong warnings online. Her tomatoes had struggled the year before, and she blamed the mulch she had added. But when she showed me her garden, I noticed immediately what had gone wrong. She had tilled the chips directly into her soil. No one had ever told her that mulch is meant to sit on the top like a protective blanket, not be buried. When she tried again the next year this time, laying the chips gently over the surface, leaving the soil undisturbed, her garden flourished. She couldn't believe how well her plants grew, or how moist the soil stayed even during hot spells. "It feels like the ground is breathing easier," she told me with a relieved smile. And that's exactly what happens. When wood chips remain on the surface, they slowly break down in the open air, adding carbon-rich goodness to the top layer of soil without interfering with the nutrients below. They insulate, retain moisture, discourage weeds, and create a soft, earthy environment where worms thrive. Over time, those wood chips break down into a rich, dark layer that resembles the forest floor, crumbly, fragrant, and full of life. Fertilizer companies would love for you to believe that wood chips are dangerous, because a gardener who trusts natural mulch is a gardener who buys far less product. But the truth is gentle, simple, and deeply rooted in nature's design. Wood chips used the right way are one of the best gifts you can give your soil. They don't steal nitrogen, they protect it. And they help the underground community stay warm, moist, and active, even through winter's cold breath. Dear friend, now that you understand how mulch protects the soil and nourishes the underground workers, I want to share something that feels almost magical, a simple addition that turns ordinary mulch into a powerful engine of soil transformation. It's something nature has used for millions of years, yet most home gardeners have never tried it. I'm talking about wine cap mushrooms, often called the gardener's mushroom, a helper, so gentle and effective that it feels like a secret whispered from the forest itself. Wine caps are not the mushrooms you find randomly sprouting in your yard. They're a specific kind of edible, safe fungus that thrives in wood chips and helps break them down at a remarkable pace. Think of them as the master chefs of the mulch world. While most fungi slowly nibble away at wood chips over several years, wine caps feast with enthusiasm, breaking them down 3 times faster. What takes nature years to accomplish, wine caps can do in a single season. It's like hiring a full-time cleanup crew to work quietly beneath your mulch, turning chunky wood chips into rich, dark soil with surprising speed. I learned about wine caps from an older gentleman named Patrick, who tended a community garden plot behind our local library. Patrick had a gentle way of tending to things, never rushed, always observant. One year I noticed his mulch beds turning into soft, chocolate-colored soil far faster than anyone else's. When I asked him how he managed it, he bent down, brushed aside a layer of wood chips, and revealed a cluster of deep burgundy mushrooms with creamy, rippled caps. These fellows, he told me, are doing more work than I ever could. He harvested some for dinner, left the rest in place, and within months his beds were reborn with richness. Adding wine caps to your garden is surprisingly simple. You don't need experience growing mushrooms or any special equipment. All you need is a small bag of wine cap spawn, often found online or at garden centers, and your wood chip mulch. Sprinkle the spawn across the mulch, water it lightly to help it settle in, and then walk away. Truly, nature takes care of the rest. Within a few months, the mycelium spreads through the mulch, knitting it together like soft white threads. Then, when the temperature and moisture are just right, mushrooms appear. You can eat them if you like, they're delicious. But even if you never harvest a single one, your soil still benefits. And if you have pets, there's nothing to worry about. Wine caps are safe for dogs and cats. What I love most about this method is how beautifully it aligns with a slower, gentler approach to gardening. There's no heavy lifting, no digging, no handling complicated materials. You're simply inviting another natural partner to join your underground community, one that works quietly through fall, winter, and spring to give you healthier soil by summer. Wine caps remind us that gardens are not made strong through our effort alone. They're made strong through partnerships with nature. And when we learn to welcome those partnerships, we find that even as our bodies slow a bit with age, our gardens grow richer, more vibrant, and more alive than ever. Dear friend, before we step any deeper into this fall method, I want to share something with you, honestly and gently, something many gardeners don't talk about, even though it's part of the natural balance of things. When you lay down cardboard and wood chips to protect your soil, you're creating a warm, dark, sheltered space. And just as your underground helpers appreciate that comfort, a few less welcome guests sometimes appreciate it too. Small field mice, voles, or voles, as some old-timers call them, may slip beneath the mulch looking for a winter home. It doesn't happen in every garden, and it doesn't mean you've done anything wrong. It's simply nature doing what nature does. But it sometimes unnerves gardeners who weren't prepared for it. I want to tell you a story about the first time it happened to me. One spring after a winter of heavy mulching, I noticed 2 of my rhubarb plants weren't sprouting as they usually did. When I brushed back the mulch, I discovered small tunnels underneath little highways, carved by curious visitors looking for warmth. They had nibbled at the roots, leaving the plants weakened. At first, I felt discouraged. I had followed nature's example. I had done everything gently and mindfully. Why would something go wrong? But then I remembered something I've learned again and again in the garden. Perfection doesn't exist in nature, only balance. And sometimes a small inconvenience is the price of a much larger reward. Because here's the truth, most people never realize if you decide not to mulch because you're afraid of a few mice, you'll lose far more to weeds than you ever will to little critters seeking shelter. Weeds compete for moisture, choke out tender roots, and return with stronger force each year. You fail to cover your soil. When you leave ground bare, it's like putting out a welcome mat for problems. Mulch may invite a handful of tiny visitors, yes, but bare soil invites a whole army of issues. When I weighed it all out, the choice was clear. Losing a plant or 2 was far better than losing the entire health of my garden. A neighbor of mine, an older gardener named Teresa, once put it beautifully. After discovering similar tunnels in her strawberry patch, she sighed, smiled, and said, "Every home has a draft. Every garden has a visitor." She wasn't being careless, she was being wise. She understood that nature doesn't give us perfect control. What it gives us instead is partnership. And partnerships come with imperfections. But if we hold steady, keep perspective, and respond thoughtfully rather than fearfully, the garden rewards us far more than it troubles us. So if you've ever worried about what lies beneath the mulch, let your heart rest a little. You aren't doing anything wrong. You're simply gardening the natural way, inviting life in all its forms to swirl around your beds. And in the next part, we'll talk about gentle, simple strategies you can use to protect the plants you treasure most without giving up the mulch that keeps your soil healthy and thriving. Dear friend, now that we've talked honestly about the little visitors who may slip under mulch for winter warmth, let's turn our attention to something far more reassuring. You can protect the plants you cherish most without giving up the mulch that keeps your soil rich and alive. Think of this part as adding a quiet layer of wisdom to your fall preparations, a few gentle strategies that shield vulnerable roots, while still allowing nature to do its beautiful work. These methods aren't labor-intensive, and they don't require new strength or expensive tools. They are simple adjustments shaped by experience and kindness toward both the earth and your body. The first strategy is one of my personal favorites because it blends protection with ease, planting certain delicate or much-loved plants in pots before placing them in the ground. This works wonderfully for rhubarb, asparagus, strawberries, and any perennial with tender roots. You simply place the plant in a sturdy pot, 5 gallons works well, then bury the pot in the soil up to its rim. The surrounding earth insulates the pot through the winter, keeping it from freezing solid while the pot itself acts like a gentle shield against voles or mice. Roots stay safe, creatures stay out, and when spring comes, the plant grows just as vigorously as if it had been planted directly in the soil. My friend Caroline, who gardens with a slow but steady grace at age 73, swears by this method. She told me once, "I like knowing my plants have a little home of their own beneath the ground." The second method uses something many gardeners overlook: hardware cloth. Not chicken wire, which has openings too large to be effective, but quarter-inch mesh that small animals cannot squeeze through. You simply lay a sheet of this mesh at the bottom of a raised bed or beneath your cardboard layer before mulching. It's a one-time investment that lasts for years and creates a firm but invisible barrier. A gardener I once knew named Felix installed hardware cloth beneath his strawberry beds after losing a few too many crown clusters one winter. It was like putting a lock on the front door, he said. The following spring, not a single plant was disturbed. His berries grew so thick that he filled bowls for neighbors and still had plenty left for jam. The third method is beautifully simple and scents the air with a freshness that always reminds me of early holidays peppermint oil. Small animals dislike the smell, and a few cotton balls soaked in peppermint oil tucked into the four corners of your beds create an invisible border they prefer not to cross. It isn't harsh, it isn't harmful, and it needs only to be refreshed every couple of weeks. A bottle costs just a few dollars and lasts the entire season. I began using it after an older gardener named Ruth pressed a little bottle into my hand one autumn and said, "Trust me, dear, it keeps more than aches away." She was right. Each of these methods carries a quiet logic: protect where needed, but don't let fear guide every choice. Losing a plant or two is part of gardening, just as in life we sometimes lose things we've tended lovingly. But with these gentle steps, you dramatically reduce the risk, while still reaping the tremendous rewards of mulching. Your precious plants stay safe, your soil stays healthy, and you continue gardening with ease, not intensity. Dear friend, now that we've talked about protecting your favorite plants, it's time to turn to a question almost every gardener asks at least once. When exactly should I do all of this? And I want to share something that might surprise you. The answer has nothing to do with the calendar. Nature doesn't follow dates on a page, and the soil doesn't flip its behavior just because November arrives. If we want to work with the rhythms of the earth instead of against them, we have to learn a gentler kind of timing, one that listens to temperature dormancy and the quiet signals the garden gives us each fall. Years ago, I used to follow strict schedules. I circled dates in my garden journal: spread compost on November 1st, lay mulch on November 10th. I did it faithfully, even when the weather didn't match the plan. Some years the ground was frozen solid long before November arrived. Other years my tomatoes were still producing when I thought I should be shutting down the beds. It left me frustrated and often working in conditions that didn't feel natural. Then a wise neighbor named Ed, a soft-spoken man in his late 70s, said something I've carried with me ever since. He told me, "Don't look at the month, kid. Look at the plants." And with that one quiet sentence, my entire approach changed. Here's the real rule. The one nature actually listens to: do your fall soil work after your plants go dormant, but before the ground freezes. Plants that are still green and actively growing need their leaves to gather energy. Once those leaves have yellowed or dropped, the plant has entered its winter rest and won't be harmed by compost or mulch. This dormancy can arrive in October for some gardeners and December for others. It depends entirely on climate geography and the flow of the seasons, not the square on the calendar. The second part of the rule is just as important. Make sure the soil is still workable. If the ground freezes before you lay down compost and mulch, the workers underground slow to a crawl and can't incorporate those nutrients effectively. Freezing also prevents you from spreading materials evenly. But if the soil yields under your fingers soft enough to poke into even a little, you're still within the perfect window. Different zones experience this window at different times, of course. Gardeners in colder climates, zones 3 through 5, often find their window in late October or early November. Those in moderate regions, zones 6 and 7, may not reach dormancy until late November or early December. And in the warm south zones, 8 to 10, dormancy can arrive as late as January, when days finally cool enough for plants to rest. The key is simple: judge by temperature, not the calendar. I once watched a gardener in Texas wait for November because a book told her to. Meanwhile, her tomatoes were still setting fruit. She tried to force fall tasks on a summer garden, and naturally everything became confused. Another gardener in Maine, however, worked by feel. When her plants dropped their leaves, she gently spread compost. When her shovel tapped against frost a week later, she knew she had finished just in time. Following nature instead of dates brings both peace and success. So the next time you wonder, is it time yet? Step outside. Look at the leaves. Touch the soil. Breathe the air. Nature will always answer you more clearly than any calendar ever will. Dear friend, once winter has passed and the sun begins warming the edges of your garden beds, you might feel that familiar urge to tidy, to rake, to clear everything at once. But here's the beautiful shift we're making together. Spring no longer needs to be backbreaking. When you've mulched in fall, your soil has spent months resting and improving beneath its protective blanket. And instead of pulling that blanket off all at once, a job that tires the back and disrupts the underground workers, you can use what I call the planting pocket method. It's simple, it's gentle, and it's perfect for gardeners whose knees or shoulders aren't quite as eager as they once were. In traditional gardening, we rake entire beds clean before planting. But that exposes the soil, wakes up dormant weed seeds, and removes all the moisture the mulch has been holding on to all winter. Instead, we do something more delicate. 2 weeks before your last frost date, take a measuring tape and walk slowly across your garden bed. Wherever you plan to plant tomatoes, spaced 2 feet apart. Lettuce, 8 inches herbs, tucked in the corners. You gently pull the mulch back, only in those small spots. Each little circle should be 6 to 8 inches wide, just enough to expose the dark soil beneath. You leave the rest of the mulch exactly where it is protecting your garden, like a quilt made of last year's leaves and wood chips. I learned this method from an older gardener named Henry, who had a soft voice and an even softer way of moving through his garden. One spring, I watched him stand in the middle of his mulched bed with nothing but a rake and a measuring tape. Instead of clearing the entire area, he made tiny pockets, little windows, into the earth. Why rake an acre, he joked, when you're only planting a handful? The wisdom of that stayed with me. Over the years, I realized how much time, energy, and strain this method saved. When I adopted it myself, I could plant an entire garden bed without breaking a sweat or pushing my body past its limits. These planting pockets do more than reduce work, they actually help your seedlings thrive. The exposed soil absorbs sunlight, warming more quickly than mulched areas. This warmth encourages seedlings to root faster and grow stronger in those important first weeks. Meanwhile, the surrounding mulch keeps weeds down, retains moisture, and protects the soil structure you worked so gently to build all winter. The pockets also help keep pests at bay. Since many insects overwinter in mulch, pulling it back creates a little space between young seedlings and the critters waking up as temperatures rise. What I love most about this method is how naturally it fits into the rhythms of aging. As we grow older, gardening can feel overwhelming if we expect our bodies to keep doing what they once did easily. But gardening doesn't need to be harder, it just needs to be wiser. Planting pockets allow you to move slowly, intentionally, touching only what needs touching, and leaving the rest to nature's steady hand. With each pocket you open, you're creating a gentle invitation for growth, rather than a frantic push to get everything ready at once. And when the sprouts finally emerge, tender green, full of promise. You'll see how beautifully this method blends care for the earth with care for yourself. Dear friend, now that you've learned the gentle art of planting pockets, I want to share a truth that many gardeners discover only after years of trial and error. Mulch is a wonderful helper, but only at the right time. In those first few weeks after planting, seedlings are like newborns, tender, soft, and easily overwhelmed. They need warmth, light, and space to breathe. Mulch, while incredibly beneficial, can sometimes crowd young plants too early, holding too much moisture around their delicate stems or giving shelter to insects waking up from winter sleep. But once your seedlings are older and stronger, mulch becomes their greatest ally, offering all the benefits without the risks. I learned this lesson the hard way one spring when I eagerly pulled mulch too close to my tomato starts. They were barely 2 weeks old, their stems still thin, their leaves just learning to turn toward the sun. A few days later, I noticed tiny nibbles on the edges of their leaves, little visitors who had been hiding under the mulch, grateful for the shelter I'd unknowingly dragged right to my tender seedlings. I felt frustrated, even guilty, until an older gardener named Jeannie reminded me gently, "Young plants aren't ready for blankets, dear. They need open air first." And she was right. Mulch is like a warm quilt. It comforts best once we're strong enough not to smother beneath it. So here's the rhythm nature teaches us when your seedlings are new. Just plant it into their little pockets, keep the mulch pulled back several inches all around them. Let sunlight reach the soil so it can warm more quickly. Let air circulate so stems stay dry and sturdy. Let young roots explore without the weight of mulch pressing down too soon. During these early days, your plants rely on the warmth of bare soil and the clarity of their small, open space. But as the weeks pass, usually around 4 to 6 weeks after planting, you'll notice a shift. The stems thicken, the leaves broaden, the plants take on that confident posture that says, "I'm ready." This is your cue. Now you can gradually pull the mulch back toward each plant, inch by inch, until it forms a protective ring around the base. This ring holds moisture, prevents soil from drying out, discourages weeds, and continues feeding your underground workers. And importantly, it keeps splashing rainwater from hitting the soil and bouncing diseases onto lower leaves, a quiet benefit many gardeners overlook. Let me share one more memory. My friend Walter, who gardened well past the age of 80, used to say that mulch and seedlings had a relationship just like grandparents and toddlers, loving, but best introduced slowly. He would smile as he gently scooped mulch toward his larger plants, saying, "Now you're big enough to enjoy the shade." His tomatoes were always among the healthiest in our community, and he credited that to respecting each stage of growth, letting nature set the pace. By understanding why mulch helps more later than at first, you're giving your plants the gift of proper timing, a kindness as important as water or sunlight. And you're giving yourself the peace that comes from gardening with wisdom rather than urgency. When we follow nature's rhythm, everything grows with a kind of effortless grace. Dear friend, now that we've talked about mulch planting pockets and the gentle timing of spring, it's time to explore one of the most important yet most overlooked steps in creating a truly thriving garden. This is the part almost nobody teaches, even though it explains so many frustrations gardeners face in May and June. I'm talking about soil testing. Not the complicated kind you see in science labs, but simple ways of discovering what your soil actually needs and what it doesn't. Too many gardeners spread compost mulch, faithfully plant their seeds with hope, and then feel heartbroken when tomatoes develop blossom end rot. Garlic yellows or strawberries refuse to fruit. They look at their beds and whisper, "What did I do wrong?" The answer often lies beneath their feet, in the unseen balance of nutrients. Let me share a story with you. A woman named June once invited me over to take a look at her troubled tomato plants. They were stunted with curled leaves that refused to green. She had added compost the previous fall. She had mulched beautifully. She had been diligent in every way she knew how. But when I asked if she had tested her soil, she shook her head. I thought compost fixed everything, she said softly. And that's where so many gardeners, even experienced ones, stumble. Compost is wonderful, but it cannot replace missing nutrients the soil never had to begin with. If your soil lacks calcium, no amount of compost can magically fill that gap. If sulfur is missing, garlic will yellow every year, no matter how lovingly you care for it. If magnesium is absent, leaves fade and weaken long before harvest. Soil testing isn't about judgment, it's about clarity. The surprising truth is this soil testing should be done after winter, not before. Fall is the time to feed and protect the soil. Spring is the time to listen to it. All winter long, your underground workers have been breaking down compost, balancing nutrients, softening acidity, and transforming your mulch. By the time spring warmth returns, the soil has settled into its true character for the year. That is the perfect moment to test. Testing earlier, before winter has done its work, gives you an incomplete picture, like judging a story after reading only the first chapter. I once met an elderly gardener named Mr. Collins, who taught me a phrase I still repeat to newcomers: test your soil like you test your health, regularly, gently, and before something goes wrong. He had been gardening for more than 50 years, yet he still took the time each spring to learn what his soil was asking for. Some years it needed calcium, other years potassium. Occasionally, everything was perfectly balanced, and he added nothing at all. The result, his garden rarely struggled. He wasn't guessing. He wasn't relying on store-bought formulas designed for average conditions. He was responding to the exact needs of his own little patch of earth. Testing your soil is an act of compassion for your plants, for your budget, and for your peace of mind. It saves you from unnecessary purchases, prevents discouraging surprises, and helps you care for your garden with confidence instead of confusion. And as we move into the next section, you'll discover that soil testing doesn't have to be expensive or complicated. There are methods for every budget, every ability level, and every gardener who wants to listen more deeply to the ground beneath their feet. Dear friend, now that we've embraced the importance of listening to our soil, let's walk through the practical ways you can do it gently, simply, and without spending more than you choose to. Soil testing doesn't need to feel intimidating. You don't need a science background or fancy equipment. What you need is curiosity, a few household items, and the willingness to get to know your soil just a little better. There are 4 methods, each suited to different needs and budgets, from completely free to modestly priced to deeply thorough for gardeners who want the most precise information. Think of these methods as different levels of conversation with your soil whispers. Words, sentences, and full stories. The first method is the jar test, entirely free and surprisingly revealing. You scoop a bit of soil into a clear jar, fill it with water, shake it well, and let it sit for a day. Over time, the soil settles into layers: heavy sand at the bottom, then silt, then light clay on top. This simple test tells you your soil's personality, whether it's sandy loamy or clay heavy. It won't tell you nutrients, but it tells you texture, drainage, and how your soil holds moisture. I once knew an older gardener named Susan who swore by this test. She said it made her feel like she was reading the earth's fingerprint. When she discovered her soil was mostly clay, her struggles with drainage suddenly made sense. The second method, also free, is the vinegar and baking soda pH test. You take 2 small cups of soil. Into 1 cup, pour vinegar. If it fizzes, your soil is alkaline. Into the second cup, add a mixture of baking soda and water. If it fizzes, your soil is acidic. If nothing reacts, that your soil is likely neutral. This test isn't perfect, but it gives you a quick impression. A gardener named Martin once told me this test saved his garlic crop. His soil turned out to be too acidic, explaining why his garlic yellowed every year. With just a handful of wood ash, he brought his pH into balance, and his next harvest was his best ever. The third method, still budget-friendly, is to buy a basic soil test kit, often around $15. You can find them at Dollar Tree, Walmart, or any garden center. These small kits test nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and pH. They aren't laboratory precise, but they're good enough for most home gardeners. They give you a fuller conversation with the soil, telling you which nutrients are running low and which are abundant. My neighbor Patricia used a kit like this every spring. She treated gardening like a gentle routine, tea first, soil test second. It gave her a sense of calm control, knowing she wasn't guessing anymore. The fourth method is the professional lab test, costing $30 to $50. This is the deepest, clearest conversation you can have with your soil. University labs like the UMass Extension or local agricultural services will send you a detailed report, exact nutrient levels, micronutrients, organic matter percentage, cation, exchange capacity, and the specific amendments your garden needs. You only need to do this once every 2 or 3 years. For serious gardeners, it's a small investment that prevents expensive mistakes. I remember an elderly man named Harold who gardened behind our community center. He said the lab test was the best $35 he ever spent. It told him exactly what to add, and more importantly, what not to buy anymore. The beauty of these 4 methods is that they give every gardener, no matter the budget or experience, the chance to understand their soil deeply. You don't have to buy fancy fertilizers or trust guesswork. You can learn the truth directly from the earth itself. And once you know what your soil needs, you can nourish it precisely, saving money, effort, and heartache. Dear friend, now that you know how to test your soil, whether through a free jar test or a detailed lab report, it's time to talk about what to do with that information. This is where gardening becomes both simpler and kinder to your budget. Instead of buying big bags of general-purpose fertilizer that promise to fix everything you add, only what your soil specifically lacks. It's a bit like caring for your own health. You don't take every vitamin on the shelf, you take only what your body needs. This gentle, targeted approach not only saves money, it creates healthier soil, stronger plants, and fewer problems down the road. One spring, I visited a gardener named Lillian, who was frustrated with her tomato plants. They produced plenty of leaves, but very few fruits. She told me she had been adding compost every year and even trying expensive fertilizers, but nothing changed. When we tested her soil with a simple kit, the answer revealed itself immediately. Her nitrogen was high, too high in fact, while phosphorus was low. Her plants were growing lush green foliage at the expense of flowering and fruiting. What she needed wasn't more compost or a bag of all-purpose feed. She needed a small boost of bone meal, gentle, natural phosphorus. The next season, her tomatoes blossomed beautifully. She couldn't believe such a small adjustment could make such a difference. Once you understand what your soil is missing, here are the most helpful and affordable natural amendments. If your soil is low in nitrogen, you can use blood meal, just a small sprinkle, as it's potent. It costs only a few dollars and lasts a long time. You can also chop plant trimmings or use coffee grounds in moderation. They feed the underground workers slowly and kindly. If your soil is low in phosphorus, bone meal is your friend. It encourages strong roots and plentiful blooms. Many older gardeners swear by it for garlic, onions, and flowering plants. If your soil needs calcium, the solution might be sitting right in your kitchen. Crushed eggshells, rinsed, dried, and ground, break down slowly and offer a gentle source of calcium. Tomatoes and peppers especially appreciate this boost. If your soil lacks potassium, wood ash from a clean burning fireplace adds it naturally. Just be careful not to add too much, as it can raise pH. A light dusting is often enough. If your garden is low in sulfur, a few tablespoons of Epsom salt can help. It strengthens cell walls, deepens green color, and helps plants use other nutrients more efficiently. This focused approach feels empowering. You're no longer guessing or buying products because the packaging looks promising. You're responding directly to what your soil asks for, no more, no less. And the best part, that these amendments aren't stressful to apply. They're light easy on the back and require only gentle sprinkling or mixing into the top layer of soil. No heavy digging, no lugging big bags across the yard. I once heard an elderly gardener named Martha describe soil care as listening instead of lecturing. She said that once she started giving the soil exactly what it lacked, not what she assumed it needed, her garden became more forgiving, more resilient, and far more abundant. She wasn't working harder, she was working smarter. And that's the beauty of targeted amendments. They meet your garden where it is, and they meet you where you are at a stage of life where simplicity and wisdom matter more than labor and strain. By fixing only what's missing you, avoid waste. Protect the underground community and save your energy for the parts of gardening that truly bring joy. Tending, watching, nurturing, and harvesting. Dear friend, now that we've explored targeted amendments, I want to share one of the most surprising and empowering lessons nature ever taught me, something that shifted the way I look at every corner of my garden. It's the idea that weeds, those stubborn little plants we often curse under our breath, are not intruders at all. They are messengers. They are quiet indicators pointing to what your soil needs or lacks. Once you learn to read them, they become guides rather than enemies. And best of all, this knowledge costs nothing, requires no heavy lifting, and can help you understand your soil more deeply than any store-bought fertilizer ever could. I learned this wisdom from an older gardener named Judith, who tended a long, narrow plot behind her small white cottage. Her garden always seemed impossibly healthy: tomatoes firm and bright greens crisp even in summer heat. And yet she rarely added anything to her soil. One afternoon I asked her how she managed it. She knelt beside a patch of dandelions growing near her fence and said, "I let the weeds tell me the story before I try to change anything." Then she explained what each weed meant, her voice calm and sure as though reading from an old familiar book. Dandelions, for instance, are a sign of low calcium and compacted soil. They send down deep taproots because the soil is tight and hard. When they die back, they return those nutrients to the top, slowly healing the problem they appeared to complain about. Clover, that delicate three-leafed visitor that some gardeners try endlessly to pull, shows low nitrogen. Clover actually fixes nitrogen into the soil, enriching the very place it grows. I once saw an entire lawn filled with clover that looked healthier and greener than any manicured yard in the neighborhood. The clover was working quietly, while the gardener barely lifted a hand. Crabgrass tells a different story. It thrives in poorly aerated, compacted soil with low organic matter. When crabgrass shows up, it's like the soil saying, "I need air and structure." Plantain, the wide-leaf weed found along driveways and old paths, points to acidic soil. It doesn't grow randomly. It grows because the ground beneath it calls for help. And here's the astonishing part. Each of these weeds, through their roots and life cycle, actually works to fix the very issue that invited them. They are nature's slow, steady doctors. I once visited a garden where the owner had tried everything to eliminate dandelions. He sprayed, dug, pulled, yet they kept returning. When we tested his soil, it was severely compacted and low in calcium. The weeds weren't the problem, they were the prescription. He laughed when he realized the earth had been trying to communicate with him for years. Once you begin reading weeds this way, you stop seeing them as a failure and start seeing them as teachers. They help you understand your garden's hidden needs without spending money without guessing, and without the frustration that so often comes from wondering why a plant struggled despite your best efforts. So the next time you walk through your garden and notice something sprouting where you didn't expect it, pause before you reach for the trowel. Ask yourself, what is this weed trying to tell me? You'll be amazed by how much your soil has been speaking if you're willing to listen. Dear friend, now that we've learned how to read weeds as gentle signals from the earth, I want to share the final remarkable truth about them. Something that shifts frustration into gratitude once you fully understand it. Weeds don't just communicate what your soil lacks. They actively fix those problems. They show up precisely where help is needed, and through their life cycles, they repair the ground in ways we often overlook. It's a quiet, steady restoration that happens without us spending a penny or lifting anything heavier than a handful of mulch. Years ago, I visited a small community garden where one corner plot always looked strangely healthier than the others. While some beds struggled with hard soil, patchy growth, or yellowing leaves, this plot was dark, crumbly, and rich. When I asked the gardener, an older man named Luis, what his secret was, he laughed softly and said, "I let the weeds work before I do." He explained that when he first inherited the plot, it was full of dandelions, crabgrass, and clover. Instead of fighting them, he observed them. Over time, he noticed something extraordinary. The soil beneath those weeds transformed. It softened. It darkened. It came alive. The weeds were doing what fertilizers and machines couldn't. Here's how the healing works. Weeds with deep taproots like dandelions and dock drill down into compacted ground. They push through hard layers, creating channels that allow air and water to penetrate. When they die back, those taproots decompose underground, leaving behind natural tunnels that loosen the soil. Meanwhile, those roots pull nutrients like calcium, magnesium, and trace minerals up from deep layers and bring them closer to the surface, exactly where your vegetables need them. Other weeds like clover work differently. Clover belongs to the legume family, which naturally fixes nitrogen into the soil. This means that clover quietly enriches the ground with nitrogen, one of the key nutrients plants need for healthy leaves and strong growth. Gardeners spend good money buying nitrogen fertilizers when nature provides it for free through tiny white blossoms carpeting the ground. Even crabgrass, as pesky as it seems, grows where soil lacks organic matter and structure. When it dies, its fibrous roots decompose into carbon-rich material that helps the soil regain depth and resilience. Plantain, which grows in acidic or compacted areas, sends broad leaves that gather nutrients, then fall and break down to rebalance pH. Over and over, I've seen gardens heal faster when gardeners step back and look at weeds not as enemies, but as signals and companions in the restoration process. My friend Elaine once told me, every weed has a job. And it's true. They arrive for a reason. And when their work is done, when the soil is healthier, looser, richer, they naturally fade away or become easier to manage. Weeds are never random. They are nature's way of filling gaps, repairing damage, and restoring balance. This doesn't mean you need to let weeds take over your garden. But it does mean that when you see them, you can learn from them, observe them, use them. Let them guide you toward understanding what your garden needs most. Then, as your soil improves, through mulching, composting, and gentle tending, you'll find that weeds become fewer, weaker, and far easier to control. It's a humbling and beautiful reminder that the earth is always trying to heal itself, and we as gardeners are simply joining that quiet work. Dear friend, as we come to the end of this gentle journey through fall soil care, I hope you can see what I've discovered only after many years of tending, learning, and unlearning. Gardening isn't meant to strain us, exhaust us, or make us feel inadequate when our bodies slow down. It's meant to be a place of comfort, a sanctuary, a quiet partnership with the earth that becomes sweeter as we grow older. When we stop trying to force the soil into obedience and instead begin working alongside nature, feeding it in the fall, protecting it through winter, respecting its rhythms in spring, we discover a gardening style that suits every season of life, especially the golden ones. Think back to all the little lessons we gathered along the way. The soil isn't just dirt, it's a living city humming with creatures who till, aerate, feed, and protect your garden without expecting anything more than a thin layer of compost and a soft blanket of mulch. Leaves, wood chips, cardboard mushrooms, simple everyday things become tools of transformation when we use them with intention. We learned that mulch doesn't steal nutrients, it guards them. We saw how winecap mushrooms turn wood chips into rich soil faster than we ever could with our own hands. We talked honestly about tiny winter visitors and how a few gentle precautions keep your precious plants safe. We discovered that spring doesn't need to be a race or a heavy chore. It can be as simple as creating small planting pockets and letting the garden wake slowly. And perhaps most importantly, we learned to listen. To listen to the whispers of weeds at the needs of the soil, the quiet cues of temperature, instead of dates on a calendar. We learned to work with what nature provides, rather than buying what companies insist we need. There's such freedom in that, such peace. Fertilizer companies may not want you to know that compost and mulch things your neighbors throw away can give you richer soil than anything sold in a bag. But now you know, and once you see how beautifully this method works, you'll never want to return to the old ways. Before we part today, I'd like to leave you with a memory. A woman I once knew named Clara tended a small garden behind her home for over 50 years. In her 80s, she moved slowly carrying a cane in one hand and a trowel in the other. One day I asked her how she kept going. She smiled and said, "I don't make the garden work harder than it needs to, and I don't make myself work harder than I should." We meet in the middle. That wisdom has stayed with me for years, and I pass it on to you now with warmth and gratitude. Your garden doesn't need perfection. It needs partnership. And your hands, no matter their age, are still capable of creating beauty, nourishment, and life. As you step into the next season, let nature carry the heavy load while you enjoy the gentle parts, the early morning light, the quiet rustle of mulch underfoot, the pleasure of tending without strain. Until next time, happy gardening, dear friend.